host. I will just mute and turn my camera off. And if
Okay.
you want to give Ellen co-host capabilities to start, that would be good.
Okay, how do I do that?
You go to the right side participants tab and you hover over the name and
Yep.
3 little dots will appear. And if you
Yep.
click that, and it should be able to say make co-host.
To the right side of participants?
So there'll be the participants tab,
Yep,
and you should be able to see City Clerk and Gail and
Yep.
Ellen Collins. And if you hover
Yep.
over her name, there's 3 little dots,
yep,
and you should be able to hit make co-host.
okay, got it.
And then she'll also have controls.
Now, Maddie, I know we're recording now, but we're going to stop this recording.
No, so since she started the recording, you got to keep it recording.
I
So
see. Okay.
I will
Okay,
just, as the panelists come in, you can just let them know, they'll be notified that they'll be on recording.
okay,
So I will just mute and turn my camera off for now, but as they come in, we can assist with any functions we need.
thank you.
Morning.
Good morning.
I'm on an iPad because my internet is dead.
Oh, boy,
Yeah, everything. Just perfect timing.
right, I know, always the way.
Yeah.
The wonders of technology.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
We're awaiting one other attendee, and I wanted to remind everybody that we are being recorded.
Okay.
And it looks like the other member signed in as an attendee. You can bump her up to panelist.
So when we'll see what they have to say about how we do that, if they, like that.
What happened?
Good morning, Rosita.
How are you? How's everyone?
Great,
Very
great,
good.
thank you.
Hey,
Thanks for joining.
John. Long time no see.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for your participation. Let's begin the meeting. My name is Ann Gill, and I'm the Director of Human Resources here at the City of Somerville. And let me just read this. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Municipal Compensation Advisory Board will be conducted by remote participation. An audio recording of these proceedings will be available by using the registration link once the meeting has concluded. We'll begin this meeting by having introductions. Again, my name is Ann Gill, Director of Human Resources here at the City of Somerville, and I'm convening this first meeting of the MCAB, Massachusetts Compensation Advisory Committee. I'd like to do introductions by way of, let's do it alphabetically. So how about Rose, we'll begin with you.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Rose Durham. I am a former employee of the City of Somerville. I was the purchasing director for about 5 years, and then working as the clerk of committees for 8.5 years, part-time. So now I'm working at MIT, and I'm very thankful to be invited to be a part of this board.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Next, we'll go with Alexandre Galimberti.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Alex Galimberti. I go by he, elle, ellie pronouns. Been a resident of Somerville since 2010, and I work in the nonprofit sector.
Great, thanks. Great to meet you. Next, we'll go with John Long.
Good morning. I am retired now. I was the city clerk in Somerville for 20 years, and I served as an assistant clerk of committees to back then the Board of Aldermen for another 10 years. So I've seen the work of the Municipal Compensation Advisory Board in the past. I'm glad to be here.
Great, thanks again for joining us, John. Next, we'll go with Evelyn Persoff.
Sure. Hi, I'm Evelyn Persoff. I retired. I worked for the city for around 30 years, and mostly entirely in housing and community development. I worked as the grant manager for the city's home program. And I'm honored to be on this board.
Great, great for joining us. Appreciate it. Last but certainly not least, we'll go with Alessandra Seiter.
Hey everyone, my name is Alessandra. My pronouns are she or they. I am a librarian in Cambridge, but I've lived in Somerville for a while now. I also serve on the Pedestrian and Transit Advisory Committee, and I'm very excited to serve on this board with all of you.
Great, thank you so much. And now we'll begin the meeting with a roll call. At the time of the meeting is 10:08 on October 30th, 2023, and I'll call the roll right now. Rositha Durham.
Present.
Alexandre Galimberti.
Present.
John Long.
Present.
Evelyn Persoff.
Present.
Alessandra Seiter.
Present.
Thank you. The purpose of the Municipal Compensation Advisory Board and their scope of work is going to encompass looking at reviewing non-union compensation, which includes elected officials, those appointed by elected officials, and all members of the staff not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. So it's focused on the non-union staff compensation. So again, thank you for your participation. It's really very important work that we do here. The next on the agenda, does anybody have any questions about that? Thank you.
But I do, if
Oh,
you
sure.
don't mind, I do have a question. I see
Sure.
Donald Jacobs. Oh, is he
Yes.
he's the consultant?
That's right.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. The next is we'd like to discuss for a few minutes the process and if the committee would like to elect a chair and how we would like to do that. If you'd like to elect a chair, we can do that today, or having just have this first meeting, you may want to wait and do that at the next meeting And if that's the case and you wanted to provide us with bios, you could send those bios and resumes to myself and Ellen Collins, who's on this meeting and is my co-host, and is the Deputy Director of Human Resources, and then we will pass those on to the committee. So if we could talk for just a couple of minutes as to how you'd like to proceed, either having a chair, it's not necessary that you have one. However, if you'd like to do that, we can certainly do that at the next meeting, or we could do it now. So I'd like to hear your thoughts regarding that.
What would be the role of the chair? And how
Yeah.
much time is required from the chair?
Yeah, great question. As with all chairs of committees, it would be somebody who organizes the committee and gets ready with the information, sharing the information, making sure everybody has the right information, and helping us with scheduling the meetings, etc., which is on our agenda for the end of this meeting to talk about next steps, next meetings, etc. Any other questions, comments?
I suggest that we wait till next meeting, and if anyone's interested after these 60 minutes, they can forward a letter along to you and Ellen.
Okay. Does
I agree.
people in agreement? Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that makes sense. Okay, great. Thank you very much. And then the overview, just to give you a heads up as to what the overview is of the compensation plan. The city has engaged a consultant, Donald Jacobs, who is going to explain his process in a few minutes. We engaged a consultant to look at all positions at the city, union and non-union, and that's to really help us to establish pay ranges that are fair and equitable, looking at equity both from an external standpoint and an internal standpoint as well. So it's been a major project and a major undertaking, and something the city has not engaged in before in terms of looking at it from a holistic point of view. So that process has been in process for several months. We've looked at job descriptions, etc. And I'm not going to steal Don Jacobs' thunder because he'll explain the process much better than I can. But that has been the undertaking that the city has engaged upon. So we're really well on our way to establishing wage and compensation benchmarks as we go along. And he will explain that in much greater detail than I have. And then what I will do now, if there are any questions about anything I've said so far.
Just a question.
Sure.
So I know that a number of city employees are engaged in collective bargaining agreements right now, which is obviously not
That's right.
scope, but I know
Yep.
that the review has had some impact on the timeline of that. And I'm just curious if like our board's decision will impact that timeline at all additionally.
The timeline for unions.
Yeah, like if we, we're making decisions on the compensation study, or we're, making recommendations at least. Will our recommendations, if they take a while to come along, will they also like continue to impact the timeline of the collective bargaining agreements that are currently in process?
It will not, because the role of this board, this committee, is to look at non-union only. So one really doesn't right now have to do with the other. And just to let you know that the city has prioritized the unions first because we're in the process of negotiation. So that's well underway. So this is something that is going to be completely separate. But good question. Thank you. Are there any other questions so far? Great. So what I'm going to do now is introduce Donald Jacobs. He is a consultant with Don Jacobs LLC, Incorporated Consulting Firm, and I'm going to turn this over to him. Please feel free to ask any questions. Happy to answer any questions, either Don will or myself. So thank you. And with that, Don.
Hi, Ann.
Hi.
Yeah. Oh, there I am. Believe it or not, folks, I'm sitting in Ann's office. And she's home. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Now, only kidding. Sort of. Anyways, well, good morning. Let me, I guess, probably begin in listening to Ann a few minutes ago, just to give you a little bit more about my background, as real quickly. But though I always like to introduce myself to folks like you guys, is to share with you the fact that I've been in the business of local government now for over 40 years. And I used to have a full head of hair back when I started, but um, this is a tough group. Uh, anyways, the last 26 years, I've had my own municipal consulting company. Prior to that, though, I was a town manager for about 15 years. And in case you're wondering, well, where was he a town manager? I started in Amherst back in the mid 70s, actually as an assistant manager. Then became the town manager in Southbridge, Mass, right in the middle of the state. And then spent about, I don't know, 12 years or so. Believe it or not, I got recruited by Shawmut Bank to run their municipal department. And then after doing that for about 12 years, I went back as a town manager in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And after leaving Plymouth, basically around the year 2000, 1999 or so, that's when I formed my own company and started exploring the possibility of becoming a quote unquote consultant. I wasn't quite sure what that meant at the time, but I quickly found out that if you're going to make a living doing municipal consulting, this is the issue that you're going to have to work in, because this is the most frequent, most common, consistent issue that gets raised by municipalities right across the country, which says a lot in itself, frankly, relative to, from my perspective, having been on essentially both sides of this table. I've had to negotiate, I've had to make decisions as a town manager relative to how to pay positions and pay employees. And obviously, as a consultant, I've done now, as Ann knows, believe it or not, close to 200 of these so-called classification compensation studies, basically up and down the East Coast of the United States. Most of my work has been here. I live in Massachusetts. And as you might imagine, most of my work has been in Massachusetts and certainly in New England. Probably 3/4 of the work I've done during my consulting career has been here in New England. And 80% of that is here in Massachusetts. But what I want to begin by sharing with you is that based on that background, my background or experience, why, in my personal opinion, managing compensation is without a doubt the most difficult thing that cities and towns struggle with or are required to manage. One way or the other, you have to pay positions, you have to pay employees. And how you do that, as I said, in my opinion, is without a doubt the most difficult thing I ever had to do as a town manager. Let me say that to you another way. I know what it's like to sit here and have to make those kinds of subjective decisions and to feel uncomfortable doing it. I never, ever felt comfortable making these kinds of compensation studies, even though I had to, but I just didn't feel good about it. Within, from my perspective. So when I saw, the other thing I guess I would share with you is that I actually did a classification compensation study here in Somerville about 12 years ago. And I don't know if the former city clerk there, I guess, who the city clerk was back 12 years ago, but it was specifically related to the non-union positions and only the non-union positions. Whereas, as Ann mentioned a few minutes ago, this time around, it's the whole city, all the union positions and the non-union. But frankly, I guess I want to begin by sharing with you, if there's one issue, one characteristic that every single study that I've ever been involved in one way or another, what they all, with no exception, including the city of Somerville, what they all share in common is the issue of communication and the lack thereof. Okay. So if there's one characteristic that I think really defines managing compensation effectively or well, so to speak, is how you manage communication between employees and employer, and anyone else, whether it's a board such as yours, that's an advisory board, elected officials, anyone that has a vested interest in how employees and positions are paid. I would submit to you the number one issue, it's so far ahead of any other issue, it's not even funny. I would put cost, by the way, down at the bottom. Whereas most people, as soon as they hear that there's a compensation underway, they typically put cost right up at the top. So whether you're sitting on a city council, well, we can't afford anything, or you're a member of a union, and you can't give me enough, so to speak. cost is typically the one issue that jumps right to the forefront. Yet I've just said to you, in my experience, particularly as a consultant, I would not put cost at the top of the list. Now, I've been in Somerville long enough. I appreciate Ian saying a few months. It's actually been a little bit longer than that. I've been here long enough, let's put it this way, that I have a pretty good understanding of the city of Somerville as it relates specifically to paying positions and paying employees. And we're now in the process of meeting with all the different department heads to share with them what's been done to date, and specifically to talk to them about one of the union groups, which is the SMEA group. I'm assuming, so let me ask a question, I guess. Is everyone familiar with the city of Somerville? Do you know the union groups, or I can just simply tell you? Would it be helpful just for me to rattle them off so everybody, we're all on the same page, just so you know who they are?
Sure.
Okay. So basically, you have public safety unions, consisting of, in the fire department, you have a fire suppression union. You also have a fire alarm operator union. Fire alarm operator means dispatcher. In the police department, you have police officers, superior police officers, and also E911 dispatchers. Add all those up together, and they represent, quote unquote, the public safety positions here in the city of Somerville. And then there's the SMEA union, which basically applies to clerical positions and DPW, there's library positions. It's sort of like a catch-all kind of thing. Anyone that's not in the public safety union, typically you'll find their position in one of 3 units that are labeled A, B, and D. I'm not sure whatever happened to C, whether there ever was a C, but in any event, they're labeled the A group, or the A unit, the B unit, and the D unit. So add them all up. Those are the unions in the city of Somerville. And as Ann mentioned a few minutes ago, because of the fact that a lot of the contracts are outstanding, the mayor has been receiving a lot of quote unquote feedback, let's call it, from whatever source it's coming from, regarding the need to get the union contracts back in line or up to date. So I'm pleased to tell you that.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second here, Don. And I
Sure.
think that was good information for the group so that they have an update on what's happening, because I think Alessandra had asked a question about that. But I think this group, this committee, in the interest of their time and being efficient and effective and using their time wisely, this group is really focused solely
Yeah, I
on
understand
the
that, Ann.
non-union comp.
Right.
So
right.
if we could talk about your process, which has been a really good one, and what you're doing to look at the compensation from a non-union standpoint, that would be fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank
and we'll
you.
get to that. So I don't want to, let's say I'm going to take another 5-10 minutes at the most, hopefully. I have a cohort next to me that will kick me under the table if I take more than that. Anyways, no matter what group we're talking about, I think it's important for the board to recognize and understand the process is the same, no matter what group we're talking about. So when I use the word process, what I'm talking about is a way to pay positions, and secondly, a way to pay employees. And I am well aware of the fact that, so let's talk about the non-union group. Would I be correct in assuming that you all have seen the non-union class and comp plan? Do you have copies of it? Yes, no, maybe?
No.
All right, well, that's something, and we need to correct as soon as possible. So you need to get a copy of the plan. The plan right now for non-union positions consists of 14 grade levels and, believe it or not, 21 steps. All right, so within that structure, within that so-called plan, I don't know what the rough total of number of non-union positions, but it's quite a few. It's well over 100, probably close to 150, I'm guessing, or so. A lot. It's the biggest group in the city. Big doesn't really mean anything. What is significant, and not the number of employees, but the number of grade levels. That's a significant issue. But let me come back to that. What I want to share with you to help you understand the process that I'm following. And again, no matter what group we're talking about, it's the same process. If we could put up on the screen the goal objectives chart. It's my way in one piece of paper to share with you what the purpose of the study is, why we're doing it, and also what we hope to accomplish. Okay, so you can see right up front, right up top there, when I use the word goal, what I'm talking about is what's the purpose of the study? Why do you have a compensation plan? And as you can see, it's a one sentence definition. It says, in accordance with the mass pay equity law. So let me just stop there. If you're not familiar with the mass pay equity law, you're going to need to become familiar with it. It's a law that's been on the books here in Massachusetts. I don't know exact number of years, but I'm going to guess somewhere around 5 or 6 years. So it's not old, but it pertains specifically to gender equity, men and women. But I would submit to you that the process that is outlined in the pay equity law would apply to anyone, any position, any group. And frankly, it's a process or it's a concept that I've been following since I started doing consulting 26 years ago. What the Massachusetts Pay Equity Law, or what they call MEPA as an acronym, has to do is how to compare positions to one another. So when we use the word classification, we're talking about comparing them to one another, not based primarily on dollars and cents. And of course, it pertains both not only to compare them to one another, but also to pay them. And we're talking about paying both positions and employees. Two separate decisions. They're linked together. They're joined at the hip, obviously. But I would submit to you that they're two distinct, separate issues, which give you some indication right up front in terms of how we generally approach the issue of paying positions first, and then secondly, paying employees second. And the two key words you see in italics are the two characteristics that everything we talk about, with no exception, no matter what aspect of compensation you want to talk about, needs to meet these two characteristics, what I call standards. One, the process, that whatever we're talking about needs to be fair. Well, what does fair mean? Fair means, as you can see in parentheses, it means consistent. And what the word consistent means, we can explain it. You remember I said earlier, communication being such a critical issue. So to pay positions, to pay employees fairly, really what we mean is we can explain how we're doing it. And then the second characteristic or criteria, standard, whatever you want to call it, is equitable. Well, what does equitable mean? And parentheses, obviously, I think it means competitive. And what do we mean by competitive? We have to be able to explain what the term means. And everything we do about developing a compensation plan really boils down to defining that word, both in terms of how you pay a position internally and or an employee internally, as well as externally. So the word competitive applies to both internal competitiveness as well as external. Okay. And I think it's important to recognize that typically when you talk to employees, as I've done numerous times in the number of studies I've done, including the city of Somerville, and those employees that I've spoken to, their number one concern right now is primarily internal equity. Having said that, what you hear from particularly department heads, and I really haven't spoken to a lot of employees, but department heads, first thing right up front, they typically have talked to me about is how they're having a hard time retaining employees, let alone recruiting them. And that in their opinion, the city of Somerville is not paying employees, quote unquote, competitively. The problem with that, the issue with that word competitive, is that it hasn't been defined. You have one way of defining the word competitive, I have another, and someone else has a third. The point is it's not being done consistently. So no matter what aspect of the study we're talking about, it needs to be done fairly and it needs to be done competitively. And we'll come back to the competitive or to the compensation part of this in a second. So what you see listed here now are the three things that we're trying to accomplish in developing for the study. So in other words, when these three objectives, difference between an objective and a goal, objectives are time bound. They have a beginning and an end. And they're identified by timelines. And they're in what you see here on the chart, they're in priority order. So the very first thing we did was to write quote unquote accurate job descriptions. And as you might imagine, particularly, having been a municipal employee or wherever you've worked, writing a job description is the most labor time consuming part of doing this type of work. But nonetheless, it's the first objective. And I'll come back to that in a second. Once we've have written accurate job descriptions, by the way, the word accurate, I should say, means two things. It means describing where employees spend the bulk of their time today. And secondly, it means describing what the pay equity law calls the comparable value. And that's a term that I would encourage you to become familiar with. Comparable value in the mass pay equity law is defined. It's in black and white. And you can look up the law online, or we can certainly provide you with a copy of it. But I would encourage you to take a look at it, okay? And so comparable value means the required, what the city requires or the employer requires as the minimum knowledge, ability, or skill to carry out a job duty, no matter what that job duty might be, under similar working conditions. Okay? So when we write a job description, essentially what we're doing is we're describing that comparable value. And I'll come back to that in a second. Once we did that or do that, then we develop a classification plan. And the purpose of the classification plan is to be able to compare positions to one another, not based primarily on dollars and cents, but based on what is referred to in the definition or the characteristic there as quote unquote job factors. Job factors means comparable value. It means what's the required knowledge, ability, or skill that you need to carry out any and all job duties or so-called essential functions, right? No matter what it is, no matter when it is. So in developing a classification plan, that really means writing a job description. And I'll come back to that in a second as well. The third objective, the third step, is once we've completed the first two, then we develop the compensation plan, and not until then. Now, compensation plan, obviously, the word compensation indicates that that's where cost begins to come into play. So in developing a compensation plan, there's two basic aspects to it. One is internal equity, as you can see mentioned here, and the other one is external equity. So in developing a compensation plan initially, let me say there's two aspects to it. One is to pay a position, and the other one is to pay an employee. Paying a position means developing a salary range, a minimum and a maximum. And that's the first step in developing a compensation plan. Once you've done that, or I should say in developing the salary range, within each salary range, you can see two items that I've highlighted for you. You'll see recommended what I call a hiring range. And now I'm talking about paying an employee, both a new employee to hire them, and then secondly, to retain them. And in retaining an employee, within each salary range, we will define what we call a market equity range. Market equity means competitive. Okay. So those are the three things that that I've been asked to do. The city issued probably one of the best written scope of services that I've ever seen in 26 years, about as detailed a set of scope of work issues, asking a consultant to work with you on. Very, very detailed. I think it's important to point out as it relates specifically in terms of the difference between the non-union scope of work versus the union scope of work. The one fundamental difference in terms of the scope of work that was described, two separate bid documents. The scope of work document or the bid document for the non-union included pay for performance as an issue that they want the consultant to look at. Okay. In the union group, it's not mentioned. And I only highlight that to you just to let you know, when we start talking about and you begin to see a plan for union positions, it's a little bit different scope of work, but not other than obviously the issue of paying someone based on what you accomplish is not part of the scope of work for the union. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's just not mentioned in the scope of work. I don't mean to make a big deal out of it, but I just wanted to highlight that fundamental difference. So we're talking about specifically the non-union plan. Let me just refer back to the union for a second, because I think it's important for you to know. My work with regard to the public safety positions in all the public safety unions is basically done. As Ann mentioned to begin with, the pressure, the focus has been the priority to get that work done as soon as possible. The one union group that's not finished in terms of the work that I've been hired or required to do is the SMEA group. And let me just highlight one particular issue. The SMEA group is without a doubt the most complex group in the city of Somerville by far. And by complex, I mean, when you look at the positions that are in either of those three units, A, B, and D, it includes clerical positions. Well, right now the city is.
Don, again, not to interrupt you, but I guess I am going to interrupt you. If we could go back to the non-union and
Right.
It looks like Rose has a question. So,
Okay.
And then we can open it up to some sort of discussions and questions from the group. I'm sure they have a lot of questions, or at least some questions. So,
All right, so let me just begin and end the non-union thing, and then we can get right to your questions. what I've completed with regard to the non-union study is I've collected all the market data for the positions that I was aware of. Okay. And I've written draft job descriptions once again for the positions that I was aware of. The reason why I'm saying that I was aware of is that there are a number of positions, a lot of them, close to over 20, that I'm not familiar with. And those descriptions remain to be written. They have not been written yet. All right. And basically, that's as far as the non-union study has gotten. So we're really not that far into it. So let me stop and let's ask you for
Thank
any
you, John.
comments,
Yeah.
concerns at this point.
Sure, thank you. And I think it's as a show of hands, if we have questions, I'll call people as your hands show. So Rose, I saw your hand, so let's begin with you.
Thank you. So
Sure.
the thing that I guess I keep going back and forth, I'm hearing a lot about the union, and we're not working on the union MCAB. It's just for the non-union, just so I'm
Right.
correct, right? Okay.
Right.
Because I
Right.
think you haven't been working in a municipality for a number of years, and I think it can be a little bit easily confusing to mix union with non-union, and if we spend a lot of time talking about what the union is doing, and if it doesn't track with the non-union, I think that it could. I love hearing the history, what they're doing,
yeah.
but it's just that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's-
we
Rose,
can.
yeah, it's
Okay, so we can stay
it's not
focused on
relevant.
the, right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah, it's
but-
not relevant to this discussion and the charge of this committee. So again, I think, John did a good job of giving a little bit of the history, but aside from that, it really, I would like people focused on what the charge of the committee is, because, we want to make sure that we're hitting all the marks and getting things done in a timely manner. And again, I don't want to spend time or have the committee spend time on things that are not relevant. I know you're all busy, and I'm very thankful that you volunteered for this. So I want to make sure that I'm cognizant of the time and respectfully of your time too. So thank
Yes,
you. Appreciate that,
let me
Rose.
just interject one thing, though. Again, it's important for you to have the comfort level to know that the process we're going to be talking about specifically with regard to the non-union is the exact same process for the union position. So not that that necessarily means anything other than they're the same. All right.
Right. Yeah.
And right now,
thank you.
that's not the case.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So
Yeah.
having said all that, as I said, the mass pay equity law applies to all positions in the state of Massachusetts, public and private.
Right.
Makes no difference. So just keep in mind, there is this law out there, sort of like the elephant in the room kind of thing, that we need to be aware of, or I need to be aware of. So in recommending a classification compensation plan for non-union positions, it's important to recognize that whatever the plan is, whatever the process is that's established, needs to enable the city of Somerville to comply with that statute, right? And it will.
Yes.
It shall.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go back and talk about the job descriptions for non-union. As I said, I've written all the job descriptions for positions that I'm very much aware of. Writing them accurately, as I think I said a few minutes ago, means describing where people spend most of their time and also what the so-called comparable value is. We have a tool, and I don't know how familiar you folks are, but there's a tool that we'll provide with the city that the city has already been using, in fact, going back to when I was here 12 years ago, to enable the city to measure that comparable value. And we'll get into more detail, obviously, once we have a plan we want to submit to you. But just to let you know today, from a process standpoint, there is a document, there is a tool that's referred to as or called a position rating system. It's actually a point rating system, quote unquote. And we'll get into more detail, but it's there to help the city do it consistently. The purpose of the tool, the position rating system, is to enable the city to basically be able to explain how job descriptions have been written, why they've been written in the format that they've been written in, and what's the significance of it? How does it relate ultimately to compensation? Now, it's important for you to recognize and understand that the current job descriptions that are on file, when I say they're not accurate, what I mean by that is, I said, accurate means two things. One, they're not up to date, which means whatever job duties may be in a current job description may or may not be up to date, which is why I started by telling you the first objective or first task in writing a job description is to make sure that it is up to date. Well, how are we doing that? The way we're doing that is very simply, we've provided the city with a questionnaire, which I've asked the city to forward to employees and also to department heads. And to make it as easy as possible for them, we've said, look, either if you're comfortable filling out the questionnaire, please do so. And the purpose of the questionnaire is to give you an opportunity to tell me, you being both employee and department head. So right from the get-go, we're asking both the department head and the employee to tell us what they think is accurate in terms of describing job duties and in terms of describing minimum qualifications. Once I received that input, then I was able to write a draft job description. Now, if I didn't get any input, and there have been numerous instances where I did not, then what I had available to me were job descriptions that the city has on file and what they refer to as the central file. So one way or the other, I try to get information from the city, meaning either the true city administration, meaning HR department, or the employee and or the department head. And from that, I wrote a draft job description and then sent it back through the HR department to each department and through each department head to their respective employees, and asked each employee to review the draft document and to comment on it, not to approve it. We don't ask any employees to approve a job description, period. What we do ask employees to do, and that includes unions, is to tell us what they think is accurate. There is a difference, a big difference. The only one that approves a job description is the city. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you understand that, and that that I'm clear with you about that. So based on that so-called accurate job description, then I'm able to develop a grade or a classification plan for all the non-union positions. And at this point, based on the feedback that Ann has given me, we're developing one so-called classification plan, meaning grade plan, for all the non-union positions. And as I said earlier, I've already collected all the market data. So once we have a complete set of job descriptions, draft job descriptions, then I'm able to develop the grade plan. And as I already have the salary data, then I'm able to develop the salary ranges, pretty quickly. So from an overall time frame standpoint, what I'm hoping is going to happen is that by the end of next week, the SMEA plan, in terms of the work that I need to do, will be completed. Okay. And as I already alluded, I know Ann doesn't want me to talk about that, but suffice it to say, I think it's important. I'm going to share with you one characteristic. There are clerical positions in non-union, and there are clerical positions in SMEA. In other words, you're paying people that are doing clerical work in 2 different plans, really 4 different plans. Okay. And I'm just trying to give you a heads up. When I use the word consistent to begin with, you can see why that's not necessary. I suppose it's consistently inconsistent, in my opinion. Doesn't mean you can't do it. You are doing it. So I don't mean it negatively. I'm not trying to be critical. It's a fact. Okay. And we need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of that. So as we finally present the non-union plan to you, you're going to see clerical positions in addition to a range of any and all. The non-union group is the largest, as I said earlier, in the city. Obviously, you're going to see department heads, who are managers, and you're going to see them, whether it's managerial, paraprofessional, clerical, trade kind of positions, and so on. Every kind of position that you can think of is in the non-union group. With I suppose the one exception, unless you consider the police chief and the fire chief to be so-called public safety, because the police and fire chief positions are non-union, as are their 2 assistants. But like I said, the non-union group is the biggest. It's the largest number of positions. So it's complicated. It's not an easy plan to really get to understand, if for no other reason, because it's such a large group consisting of so many different kinds of positions, right? So that's really pretty much all I wanted to share with you this morning. I think I've already mentioned the time frame. Between now and the next time we meet, I would encourage you to take a look at the actual non-union plan, just to familiarize yourself with it. And then when and if you get a chance, just become aware of the fact that there is this mass pay equity law out there that at least you need to be aware of, and you'll hear more about it as I present a plan to you.
Thank you, Don. Do
You're
people
welcome.
have questions? In the interest of everybody's time, Alexandre, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Don, for your presentation. You
You're
mentioned that we need to be aware about the Massachusetts pay equity law. Are there also municipal ordinances that we need to be aware of in this process, such as living wage ordinances or other ordinances that specifically apply to Somerville?
Well, the non-union plan is an ordinance in itself.
Mhm.
So obviously, as I've already said several times, you need to be familiar with that one. I don't know, are there any wage,
We do have the living wage.
oh, you have a living wage document or ordinance?
Mhm.
Maybe
Yes.
Ellen,
Ellen, or Ann, do we?
Yeah.
Do you
We
have a
do.
living wage
Yep,
ordinance?
Yes, we do. We do.
So
We do
obviously, I think,
We comply. We comply with the living wage.
right, so you just need to see a copy of it, I guess, to understand it.
Correct, correct. And the non-union compensation plan is on our website as well. It's on the City of Somerville's website. Under on the compensation tab, I believe. We can send you what you need though, however.
Do you have any other questions, concerns at this point? No news is good news, by the way.
Yeah.
I do have a question. You said in that the non-union compensation plan is on the city website. Is that the one that Dawn is developing, or is it the old one, or
It's the current one, John.
you're gonna send us the draft one that Dawn is developing?
Eventually, yes.
Eventually, not now.
Yes, not now, no. He's working on that.
Because I haven't finished my work yet, John,
Yeah.
so. I guess along that way, John, just to give you guys, again, a little bit more of a heads up. What you're going to get from me is it's going to be presented to you in 2 steps. All right. The first step is going to be the classification plan. Right. And I do this intentionally. In other words, the first conversation we're going to have and the first document that I'm going to ask you to review and to comment on will not include any dollars and cents at all. Okay. It'll show you a grade plan with positions being recommended to be classified in different grade levels. That'll be the first document. Once I know you're comfortable and you understand the process that I followed or what I'm recommending the city to establish, then we'll get into the dollars and cents. First, in terms of paying a position, and that'll deal specifically with salary ranges, minimum, maximum. And what's the process, not only to develop them, but also to maintain them, right? Once we've done that, and in doing so, we'll talk about a hiring range and a market equity range within each salary range. Once we've done that, then we'll talk about paying an employee both to hire them as well as to retain them. It'll be in that order, okay? So we really won't get to cost. The first 2 objectives that you see up on the screen here don't cost the city of Somerville a penny. So cost is not a reason why you either agree or disagree. And I say it to you intentionally because I began by telling you that if there's one characteristic that I've noticed in every single place I've ever been, is that cost is the first issue and the primary issue that's on everybody's mind, maybe including yourselves as well. I don't know. But what I've just told you is that the first 2 objectives, 2 out of the 3 objectives don't cost you anything. Not a penny. All right. So if you're thinking about, well, what the city can afford, and by the way, along that same line of reasoning, what I hope you're also asking yourself is not only what the city can afford, but what's the best way to spend the money? And unfortunately, that second question just does not get asked at all, anywhere. And that's unfortunate in my opinion. So I think as you can begin to tell, as you're getting, and as Ann and all of Ann's staff know me pretty well by now, you know, I always like to say, you can't take the manager out of me, so to speak. Unlike other consultants, frankly, I've been on both sides of the table. I know what it's like to have to manage, have to make these kinds of decisions. And frankly, I didn't know enough about how to do it to really feel comfortable, as I said to begin with. After having done 200 of these studies, I feel very, very comfortable. Okay. As Ian can well attest.
Thank you. Thanks, Don. So
You're
maybe
welcome.
Alessandra, you have a question as well?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I have several questions, but maybe I'll start with just 2. So number 1, I know that elected officials are included in non-union positions that we'll be reviewing. So I'm curious, what relationship our review and your review, Don, will have with the charter review that has been going on, as well as the like the charter itself, in terms of how compensation is described in there as being determined. Because in there it says that, you know, counselor compensation is determined by an ordinance that they can approve themselves within their own body. So I'm curious kind of what authority this review will have over their compensation as well.
Andy, you want to comment on that, or?
Yep, I will. Yeah. Dawn's focus is primarily related to the ordinance. He has not been involved in the charter review.
Yeah, at all.
That's beyond the scope of what we've hired him to do.
Now, if I could just add to what, Ian, to help you, Alexander, maybe put this in perspective. I began by saying there's union group and a non-union group. I think you're correct in pointing out there's a third group, and that's the elected officials. So no matter what group we're talking about, and I'm just giving you my personal opinion, they all have unique characteristics. A union group is not a non-union group and vice versa. The difference being primarily how you implement, how you put into effect a classification compensation plan. Obviously, with a union group, you have to negotiate it. With a non-union group, you don't.
Right.
But in my opinion, they both should be treated again the same. That's why I began by saying, and you probably heard me say several times already, the process should be the same.
Right.
How you implement a change is obviously different. So the other, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, I'm sure. By definition, both statutorily as well as locally within the city of Somerville, how you pay elected officials, by definition, elected means the only minimum qualification to become an elected official is residency, right? Unlike other positions where we're writing a job description, and I've already mentioned the phrase minimum qualification more than several times. Well, a job description establishes those comparable value minimum qualifications, and non-union positions, not all of them, but a good number of them are governed by civil service law. Not to get off a tangent on civil service, but suffice it to say.
Yeah, let's not. So I know, yeah, Alessandra, you had other questions. I'm just trying to move this along, Dawn, in the interest of time. Again, I want to be respectful
let me
of
just
time. So Alessandra.
I'll just maybe I'll keep it to one more question, and I think it's really, coming off of this first one. So thinking about how salaries will change, in the future, post this study, and also thinking about the similar study that you did 12 years ago. I'm curious how much, and maybe we'll get more information on this in the future, but curious how much the compensation issues and challenges have changed since your first assessment 12 years ago. And if the suggestions that you made back then have been like consistently implemented, or if you've seen kind of a, deterioration over those 12 years. And then thinking about that, like, what is the hope for the future? Is the city's plan to do a study like this every 10 years, or to develop more robust internal mechanisms for maintaining, salary equity and compensation parity?
Yeah, those are great questions. The one fundamental difference I can share with you, and it makes common sense, frankly, and that is technology. Obviously, in other words, what an employee needs to know to carry out his or her job duties today has no correlation, no relationship, for the most part, to what they might have done, or what an employee might have been required to know, or what skill they needed to have 12 years ago. And I think that's self-evident, right? Where there's a fundamental issue that is the same, and I alluded to it in my initial presentation, is that the city has been using a position rating system right along as a guide to help them develop classification compensation plans. Now, that's good news and not so good news. They've been using it with some groups, but not all the groups. Okay. You've already heard me say now at least 3 or 4 times, I think it should be one process. The other fundamental issue that, just to make you aware of, is that in doing this work, I'm a firm believer, and I've already recommended and given the city, once you establish a process, I think it's critically important to put the process in writing, and that does not exist today. Okay. So if you were an employee of the city of Somerville today and you wanted to be told, well, how am I being paid, both my position and myself? There, in my opinion, should be a written document that answers that question. And right now there's not. All right. I call them administrative compensation policies. I use the word administrative because it doesn't necessarily require the city council approval. Right. So that's a document, that's a part of this process that I've recommended to the city that they establish once they are comfortable with the plan that's been developed, both in terms of the classification plan or all aspects of the study, writing a job description, developing grade levels and salary ranges, and last but not least, paying an employee. No matter what aspect of classification compensation we're talking about, in my opinion, there should be something in writing that describes how it's being done, so that going forward, the odds of it being there'd be more continuity. You can always change how you do something, but at least everybody knows, what exists today and why you want to make a change. And I mean everybody, employee and employer, as well as people like yourself or, city councilors and so on and so forth. And I made that clear to Ellen, both Ann and Ellen, that, I mean, that's one of the things that I really, frankly, to be very upfront with you, I really think, as I just said, is very important. And that kind of reflects who I am as a former town manager. I know what it's like to try to manage compensation when you don't have any written guidelines to follow. And I'm sure many of you, have experienced that in one form or another. You can see why guidelines are why laws or regulations are there, why they're so important. And right now, compensation is being managed. And I'm not trying to be critical of anybody again. I please do not interpret. I'm just sharing with you what I'm ultimately recommending. So I'm giving you a heads up. You're going to see a set of administrative guidelines that describe any and all and every aspect of the study that's done and how it was done in writing. Okay. But you won't see that until you're comfortable with the process.
Thanks, Don. Alessandra, did you have another question before we move on to Rose?
No, Rose can go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Rose?
All right, I'll be quick. I'm sorry, you may have already said this, but what is the timeline for completing this project is my first question. And then my second question is, who has final approval for, the work? Because this is an election year, and I think this is a year for a current mayor may or may not be in next year. I don't know. So, so if you can someone can address those two things, please.
Well, the actual plan is obviously run by the city council. We, have everything run by the city council for their review, et cetera. And then the hiring authority, the final authority, of course, is the mayor. So she works closely with the city council in terms of all compensation related issues. So it's really a combination of the two. The city council weighs in on the actual plan, obviously, and giving its blessing as they did in the past. And then the mayor is the person who, and they obviously have approval process over the actual dollars that need to be spent. So it's a combined effort. And just to let people know, the mayor has been very clear about her goal being the compensation at the heart of equity, both internal and external. She's been very clear about that, and is actually the reason for this this comprehensive study. So thanks for that, Rose. John?
I'm sorry, there was one more thing
sorry.
about the completing. What is
the
our
timeline?
Yeah.
Don, do you want to speak to the timeline?
Yesterday. No. As I said, this week and by no later than the end of next week, we will have met with every department head to talk specifically with them about the positions that they may have in their department that are in the SMEA unit. And that will allow me then to complete that draft plan. So by the end of next week, I hope to have that draft plan completed. And then I'm in a position to devote full time and attention or effort to the non-union plan. Salary data has been collected. From a practical standpoint, the biggest time consuming issue that I can see for the non-union plan to be completed is to have job descriptions for all the non-union positions with no exception. Okay. And we're not right there yet at the moment. I'm hoping, with the help of the HR department that we can get that done relatively quickly. Uh, and I'm just throwing a rough time frame out at you, but like I said, the first document you're going to see from me is the classification plan, the grade level plan. And I'm hoping it really won't, once I've written job descriptions, it's not long, it doesn't take long for me to develop a classification plan. In fact, I've already partially developed it. So by no later than the middle of November, let's say, just to give you a rough time frame, I hope to be able to present a classification plan to you. Okay. Once I get your feedback, like I said, I've already collected market data. Once I know how, you know how I'm recommending positions to be grouped or classified, how many grade levels and the characteristics that define each of the grade levels, then I'm able to bring the dollars and cents into the process. So from a personal, from my point of view, by the end of the month, meaning end of this month or November, starting day after tomorrow, I hope to have the classification compensation plan done for the my work done. And then the only other scope of work issue that will remain for all the groups really is to work with the HR department on dealing with specific issues of concern, whether it's market retention, recruitment, particular issues for a particular position in a specific department that may require a little bit different approach or attention, just given the unique aspect of a particular position. And you have some of them. Water and sewer, I could already tell you right now, is a good example of some unique positions that exist within the center. And you have a number of others that are specific to Somerville that really aren't, frankly, found very often in the marketplace.
Yep. Thank you, Don.
Mhm.
John?
Yeah, and this question is for you.
Okay.
Are the compensated part-time board positions going to be included in this plan? Planning board, zoning board?
I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. I don't believe so. Actually, let me get back to that on John. I don't want to answer incorrectly.
Okay, I would appreciate it if they were, but
Yeah.
my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will get back to you on that. I'm not quite sure of the scope.
Okay.
Does anybody have any other questions before we move on? The last thing on our agenda is to determine next time to meet. Would like to really have determined something now, if at all possible, particularly in terms of saying, if we can have a consistent meeting to meet maybe in a month, as Don had said, he'll have more information by then. So perhaps if we could say, for example, the first Monday of the month or whatever would work for the group. And I'm not sure, again, I know we're imposing on your time and you're volunteering for this, which is much appreciated. So we want to obviously be as flexible as possible, so that we're not impacting your work or your personal lives. So
I'm sorry, can I ask one more question?
Sure. Oh, sure. Go ahead, Alice.
For Don, thank you so much for the
Sure.
time. So in terms of the job descriptions that you're writing, Don, is the hope that all the department heads will adopt those descriptions, or is it just for like internal recommendation use?
Well, the job description ultimately will tell you and everyone else, including the employees, primarily how their position is being compensated. And as I'm sure you're well aware, there's a lot of reasons why you need to have accurate job descriptions. But getting back to what I mentioned, or the term communication, the purpose of the job description will basically be to establish open lines of communication between the employee and the employer, in this case, the city of Somerville. And secondly, I'm really glad you raised this question, also more clearly, more accurately define the role of the department head as it relates to compensation. And that's something that I'm very concerned about, having, like I said, talked directly to, by the end of this week, all of your department heads. And one of the things that's very clear to me, and Ann and I really haven't had a chance to talk much about it, but is more clearly defining the role and responsibility of the department head as it relates to compensation, and specifically the job description, because as common sense would tell you, me, and anyone else, 9 out of 10 times it's the responsibility of the department head to initiate, let's say, a new responsibility, or to initiate a request to an employee to do something, right? If not 10 out of 10 times. So as you can see, going back to defining equity or fairness or competitiveness, establishing the job description really primarily in this context is designed to pay a position more money or less money, not primarily based on the marketplace. Now, it's easy for me to sit here and say that to you, But that's not the way people look at it today. They don't look at their job description as telling them how their position has been compensated. So when that finally gets established, I can assure you, having done this so many times, employees are going to look at their job description entirely differently than they've been looking at it. It's going to take on a whole new meaning, which is going to raise a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and so on, which is fine. Which, if nothing else, opens up lines of communication. So I think, again, the purpose of the job description is going to take literally about 180-degree change from what it is today. The format's going to change. The distinction between a civil service job description and let's call it a compensation job description, two different documents. They're similar. They don't contradict one another, but they're not the same. One contains a lot more information about how to pay a position. The other one, meaning civil service, pertains primarily to the minimum qualifications to be hired, to apply for a position. Okay, does that answer your question?
It does, but so you're saying that there will be two job descriptions, or that this is a new type
Exactly.
of job description?
No, two. They have to be, because we don't look to the state to approve our job description, or I should say the city. They're not mine. So going forward, the city, like I said earlier, the only entity that approves a job description, the only one, is the city of Somerville. Now, what be that the city council? Once you approve a plan, in effect, you're approving job descriptions. It's one and the same thing. Okay.
We do have 11 o'clock meetings.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Are
Thank
there
you.
other questions before we move on to setting up future meetings? Oh, Alexandra, did you bring?
Yeah, just that this discussion about the job description has got me thinking of something, and we can discuss it further meetings, is how does communications and understanding about advancement opportunities and career tracks and promotion ladders factor into that? So that's something that maybe we can just pin it for future conversation, but that's something I'd like to understand better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that'll
that's a great
come later.
question, and I think that's a good, you're right, that's a great topic for our next meeting, to talk about how that will be, how these job descriptions will impact letting people know what they need to do. It's really a communication issue between the management, et cetera, and employees, and we definitely will talk about that. Thank you, Alexandra. Yep. So to get back to trying to schedule, I know the scheduling of meetings is for everybody who's in any has been worked in any position at all. You know, the scheduling of these meetings, any meeting with a group of this size, is the most difficult. So we want to be mindful of people's time, et cetera, and really help you manage this along with us. So if we could now even throw out some ideas around next steps. Right now, it's obviously it's a Monday. It's the last Monday of the month, and it's at 10 o'clock. So could we have sort of a show of hands as to whether that would work? And that will give Dawn his month to get more information that we can present to this group. So if we were to say that we were going to meet, the last Monday of November. Oops, sorry. Oh. Sorry, I don't know how I got locked out. But if we could say the last Monday of November at 10 o'clock, if people can just take a quick look at their calendars and see if that would be something. No, Rose, okay. Do people have suggestions around other times, or obviously days, times, and
I'm available any other time except for that one
Oh,
time. That one.
okay.
So I could do
Okay.
11, I could do 9.
Oh, okay. How about 9
Um,
or 11 for other people in the
I
group
think I could do.
on that date?
11.
I take that back. 11 is good.
11? Okay,
Okay.
perfect. So why don't we pencil that in? And that date, the actual date and time is, hold on a second, trying to look at my calendar here.
Monday, November 27th.
Oh, thank you, John. The 27th at 11 a.m. Perfect. So we'll send out an invite to that to that date. And Alexandra, great question. Put it on the agenda. We'll put it on the agenda for next time. If you could keep a running list of the questions that you have, having heard Dawn's presentation, that would be great and will help us to get through the meeting in an effective, efficient manner. That would be wonderful. Are there other questions, concerns, etc.? Oh, wait a minute. There's somebody in the chat. Hold on. Let me ask. Oh, never mind. It's somebody agreeing to the time. Perfect. So with that, I will conclude but before I conclude the meeting, I will do another roll call. And we'll do this again alphabetically. Rosita Durham,
Yay.
Alexandra Galamberti,
Present.
John Long,
Here,
Evelyn Persoff,
Present.
Alexandra Sider,
Here.
and Ann Gill. I'll conclude the meeting. It is October 30th, 2023 at 11:10 a.m. And again, thank you all for your attention to this. It's really much appreciated. Take care and we'll see you in a month.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.